Welcome to our Top 100 Chess Games ranking. Our ranking kicks off with a game we've named Chess Symphony, because it was brilliantly played by two maestros as if following a musical score. This is the second game of the World Chess Championship match between Vladimir Kramnik and Garry Kasparov, played on October 10, 2000 in London. Kramnik, playing with the white pieces, initiated with d4. Kasparov responded with the knight to f6. White starts to seize the center. Black prepares pressure on the center by removing the bishop. White makes a developing move with the knight to c3. Kasparov transposes the game into the Grunfeld defense by advancing the pawn to d5, launching a counterattack in the center. It captures on d5. Black responds with the knight, placing it in the center. Kramnik advances to e4, continuing to control the center. The knight captures on c3, and black initiates a knight exchange. White responds to the knight exchange by capturing with the pawn on c3. Kasparov develops the bishop, occupying the major black diagonal. White makes a developing move with the knight to f3. Kramnik has previously explored classical options like bishop c4 and bishop b5, as well as the move h3, but his main weapon was the eighth move, rook b1. Kasparov successfully employed all these variations in the early 1980s. Black launches a counterattack in the center by advancing the pawn to c5. White cannot capture the c5 pawn since it would result in a fork after bishop captures on c3, with a check to the king. Therefore, Kramnik reinforces the center by moving the bishop to e3. Kasparov plays queen to a5, targeting the c3 pawn and applying pressure to the d4 square. White defends against this threat by moving the queen to d2. Black develops their light-squared bishop. Kramnik moves the rook to b1, putting pressure on the b7 pawn. Kasparov sacrifices the b7 pawn by playing a6, preventing white pieces from occupying the b5 square and threatening to capture space on the left flank by playing b5 on the next move. White applies an unconventional move, rarely used before, capturing the b7 square. Black exchanges the light-squared bishop for a knight. White responds to the exchange by capturing with a pawn. Kasparov intensifies pressure on the d4 square, aiming to improve his position after sacrificing the pawn. Kramnik develops the light-squared bishop to c4, preparing for a short castle. Black, through castling, hid his king in a safe place. White also castles short. Kasparov initiates pawn exchanges. White responds to the pawn exchange by capturing with a pawn. Black advances a pawn, capturing with the bishop on d4. Additionally, the dark-squared bishop occupies a strong central position. White attacks the knight with the light-squared bishop on d5, establishing a favorable central position for the bishop. In this position, it would have been beneficial for black to exchange queens on d2. defend the knight on the square c6, and in the event of an exchange of s6, white takes the pawn on e7. Black responds by infiltrating the second rank, playing a pawn to a2, resulting in an even game. Garry Kasparov makes a somewhat controversial move, attacking the queen with the bishop. The queen retreats to c1. Black has a hanging knight on c6, and they move it to d4. Kramnik exchanges, and the bishop captures the knight on d4. Black completes the exchange by capturing the bishop on d4. The position now features bishops of opposite colors, and without heavy pieces on the board, it would be a straightforward draw. White gains a pawn, putting pressure on the f7 pawn. Kasparov defends the f7 pawn, forcing Kramnik into a rook exchange. White accepts the exchange. Black captures the rook on a7, concluding the exchange. White moves a pawn to f4, with the prospect of breaking up the doubled pawns. Black responds with the queen to d8. White moves the queen to c3. Kasparov attacks the f4 pawn with the bishop. White defends the pawn by moving the queen to f3. Black increases pressure, moving the queen to h4. Kramnik advances the e5 pawn, defending against the threat of capturing on f4. With fewer pawns, the likelihood of a draw increases. Black advances the g5 pawn. White brings the rook to the e-file to create threats by advancing the pawn. Kasparov responds by playing a pawn exchange. White accepts the exchange. Black doubles the pawns on the f-file. Kramnik continues by advancing the pawn to e6, threatening to capture the f7 pawn. Black is forced to capture. White captures with the rook on e6, threatening an unpleasant check to the black king. Kasparov moves the king to g7. White captures the pawn on a6. In this situation, black needed a clear defensive plan, placing the bishop on the a7 g1 diagonal and the rook on either the second or fifth rank. It's a straightforward strategy, but it seems that Garry Kasparov overestimated his position. Rook to f5, attacking the bishop. The bishop retreats to e4. The rook moves with a double attack on the bishop. White solidifies the bishop in the center. Black responds with the rook to e7. Kramnik starts pushing his passed pawn on the a-file. Kasparov plays guilelessly, hoping for a rook exchange and a quick draw. White declines the exchange, attacking the bishop. The bishop retreats to e5, and the rebound follows on b4, protecting the pawn. Rook to d7 is a critical mistake, as white activates the king, moving to g2 and starting to pressure the opponent's pawns. Black gives a check on d2. The king moves to h3. Black advances the h5 pawn, minimizing distractions to defend this pawn. White is attacking the bishop. The bishop cannot retreat because the pawn on h5 will be lost. The king defends the bishop. Kramnik starts pushing the passed pawn on the a file. Black establishes the rook behind the passed pawn, but it's too late. Now white gives a check on b6. If the king had retreated to the g7 square, white would have achieved victory as follows: pawn to a6, bishop to d4, rook to g6, giving a check to the king. The king moves to f8, bishops recoil to b7, and blacks play a5. White attacks the bishop with rook to d6, and blacks retreat the bishop to e3. White plays rook to d5, forcing a rook exchange or losing a pawn. Exchanging rooks is not an option for blacks, as it leads to a hopeless endgame. Garry Kasparov makes a serious mistake by moving the king to e7. I suggest you pause and independently find Vladimir Kramnik's move, after which Kasparov immediately resigned. So, I hope you found this move. Bishop to d5, attacking the rook and posing a double threat with the rook on e6, and there is no defense against it for blacks. If they capture the pawn on a5, white plays rook to e6 with a check, winning a piece. And if blacks continue with rook to e2 to defend the bishop, then white plays rook to e6 with a check to the king, and after the king retreats, white advances their passed pawn. Blacks cannot simultaneously defend the bishop and impede the passed pawn, making the position hopeless. This chess game, like a chess symphony, was played by two maestros, but one of them underestimated how tricky endgames can be, especially with bishops of opposite colors. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to updates on this channel, hit the bell icon, and don't forget to leave your comments. And most importantly, remember that chess is not just a game, it is art. Let's study the masterpieces of this art together.